In November of 1978, I had just finished my first year of practicing law and my second year of being married to a woman named Susie Madden, not the Susan Morris that I've been with for the last 42 years. I had not yet met her, but I filed for divorce from Susie Madden, and it was simple, uncomplicated, uncontested. Divorce hearing like that typically takes about 3 minutes once you finally get into court. But it takes a while to get into court. And so it was months later when we finally did. But when I got down to the courthouse to go through the 3-minute routine, I was shocked and seriously unhappy when the judge said to me, "Mr. Plattner, I can't grant your divorce proceeding the way you've written these papers." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, you've got 2 names on here. It says in regard to the marriage of Richard Plattner and Susan Madden." And I said, "So?" And he said, "Well, in Arizona, as a matter of law, a married woman takes her husband's last name on entering the marriage." I said, "Well, where is that written?" And he said, "Oh, it's in the common law. Everyone knows it." Well, he was wrong, and that wasn't right. And I spent the weekend in the law library, came back with a long brief to tell him why he wasn't right, and he wouldn't change his mind. So I decided to appeal. And back then, that kind of appeal it's called a special action, and it went directly to the Arizona Supreme Court, not to the Intermediate Court of Appeals. So there I was, a year out of law school, and I'm making my first appearance ever in front of the Arizona Supreme Court in my own case for my own divorce, because I didn't want to change the paperwork to satisfy that judge, because Susie Madden had never been known as Susie Plattner, and she didn't want to be, and it just wasn't right. So we made the argument, and the judges had some tough questions, but they were clearly interested in the matter, and then they questioned the lawyer the county appointed for the judge, and they grilled him up pretty good. And I was thinking, this is great, I'm going to win this. But at the end of the argument, the Chief Justice looked at me and adjusted his bow tie and gave me a big smile and said, "Well, Mr. Plattner, you've raised some really interesting issues here, but we think this is really a woman's issue, and because you're a man, we've decided you lack standing to raise it, so we're going to deny jurisdiction of your special action." And I was dumbfounded. How can I not have standing to object? It's my own divorce. But you don't argue once the Supreme Court has made their rulings. What I did do was I went down back to the trial court, managed to get in front of a different judge, and got my divorce granted the way I wrote it, with 2 different last names. And then I called the ACLU and said, "Hey, if you get a call from a female who's got this problem, send her to me, I'll do it for free." And not 3 weeks later, I get the call, and met a very nice young woman named Malone who had just gotten out of the Army and wanted to get divorced in her name, because she had never taken her husband's. And so 90 days after my first appearance in front of the Arizona Supreme Court, I was making my second. And I was trying really hard not to come in cocky, thinking, well, you got to grant it this time. And maybe I let something show, or maybe it was just their way of having fun. But this time they just ripped me up one side and down the other. They were grilling me about all kinds of abstruse points of law, 1921 Alabama Supreme Court cases. But I had done my homework and I got through it. And at the end of it, they printed an opinion, which is in the law books, Malone versus Sullivan, which says that, in fact, in Arizona, a married woman, just like anybody else, can choose whatever name they want, as long as it's not for an illegal or fraudulent purpose. So that was a joy. It made me proud of myself for standing up. You have to remember, in 1979, it was still the fight for the ERA, and women's rights were much less entrenched, certainly not federally protected the way they are now. And there are three postscripts to this story that I think you'll find interesting. The first one is that after 29 years after that divorce, with no communication whatsoever with Susie, she got in touch again by sheer coincidence when she was in a terrible car crash, and she asked the corporate lawyers for the company she worked for a referral to a personal injury lawyer. And they gave her my last name, of course, since her last name was still Madden. They didn't suspect any connection. And she said, well, I guess it was meant to be. And then she called, and we talked, and then I took her out to dinner with Susan Morris and myself, and the two of them had a grand time telling stories of the various dorky things they remembered me doing. They didn't get through the whole list by any means on that first night, but they laughed a lot and became friends, and Susie is still good friends with us now about 12 years later. The next interesting postscript on that is that the Chief Justice who wheeled his bow tie and grinned at me was James Duke Cameron. And as you know, around here, I'm named Duke, a nickname I picked up about 10 years after that court case through another story that I'll tell you another time. And the last thing that I want to tell you as a postscript is that the fight still goes on. Last year, the Arizona Court of Appeals ruled in a case for a transgender person, biological female transitioning to become a man, who had asked to change his name to a masculine first name to reflect his new identity. And the trial judge has thrown his case out and said, no, you can't do that. And I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that the Arizona Court of Appeals cited my case of Malone versus Sullivan from 40 years ago and said, yes, he did have the right to choose the name that he wanted to go by. And they even got his pronouns right. So progress does happen. That's my story. Thanks for listening.